But the fossils that they did have there, which weren't the casts or the fakes, were pretty spectacular. So what I thought I'd do now, just very briefly, is run through a few photos of them and talk about one or two of them, and maybe John or Craig or Diane or Glenn can sort of jump in and have a few comments as we go through them, because some of these are pretty spectacular and they have some really good pieces of evidence. So it's an example of some of the stuff that you can do and see when you go around some of these museums. So to start off with, this is a big Jurassic specimen from the Solnhofen in Germany. It's the original Jurassic, which is, of course, what the Jurassic rocks are named after, the Jura Mountains, which are in Germany. And this is a coelacanth fossil. And you've also got the coelacanth there as well, their modern reconstruction next to it. And of course, this is the famous one where you had a fish, which was only known really from the fossils. It had short, stumpy legs and or fins that they thought were evolving into legs, because they were sort of short and stumpy and unusual, and considered to be extinct for many millions of years, until the modern living one turned up in a fish market in, I think, Cambodia or the Philippines or somewhere like that, wasn't it? And surprisingly to the evolutionists anyway, who were hoping that this was some kind of a fish that was on its way to evolving legs, it turns out that the fins act as fins, not as legs, and they are deep sea creatures, so they're nowhere near close to evolving legs, even if they wanted to. But still, pretty spectacular example of a living fossil, and one of the first living fossils really to come to public prominence, because I know that you've said many times, John, that living fossils are one of evolutionists' best kept secrets. They don't really talk about it or discuss it that much.
That's certainly true, Joe. Our first documentary was The World of Living Fossils, film starting here in my backyard, then moving to the local quarries, then to our collection, and nothing has changed since then, because everything that's alive is actually a living fossil, unless we manipulated its genes and produced a new variation that never did exist, but the genes did. We've just put them together in different combinations. So can I suggest all of you who are watching out there, if you want a rock solid argument, I mean that quite literally, go to living fossils and tell them to put them in their pipe and smoke them until they get sick of seeing the actual evidence that things produce their own kind. Great work, Joe.
By the way, that Living Fossils documentary is available to stream at creationresearchlive.com, and I believe we have a couple of DVDs around. However, it's a brilliant documentary. So it was the first one that Creation Research made way back in 1989, I think it was filmed. 1990 was put out, so it's getting on a little bit. And since then, we've had a lot more fossils that are living fossils and some really spectacular examples. So one of the projects we're trying to work on is to remake the world of living fossils. So pray for the opportunity to do that. Support us with finances so we can actually travel and film these things and places, and get over to Australia and film John and Diane and stuff.
I'm not a living fossil, surely, Joe.
No. You're the presenter. You get the privileged presenting role. Well, and probably a few more years before you reach living fossil status, but we'll be ready. Here's one that I know you've got one of these in your collection, John. We've actually got the modern example of this in our UK museum, the big guitarfish. Again, this is from Jurassic, Solnhofen. Although this was enormous. I mean, that whole slab is about 1.5 meters along, so it's pretty big. What's that? That's sort of 6 foot, something like that.
5 feet.
5 foot, yeah. It was pretty enormous. And again, another example of a living fossil, as well as something that's actually preserved beautifully, because this is a guitarfish. It's in the sort of the shark family, the ray family, right? It doesn't have any hard bones. It's all cartilage. So it's got no hard bits really to fossilize. So the fact that you've got it fossilized is a pretty spectacular example of rapid fossilization as well. John, you should recognize this.
Yes, we went collecting when you were out here last time. That's a stromatolite, algal sort of formation that traps sand in layers. And yes, the evolutionist loves them as thinking of the most primitive life form on the planet.
Well, they'd actually dated this one to be about 2.5 billion years old. So the fact and it's actually this particular one I took the photo of because it's from Western Australia, out of
Yeah.
the Western Australian rocks. And of course, the living ones, the modern ones, live off the coast of Western Australia. So you've got them right in the same vicinity, one that's supposed to be, 2 billion years old, and they're still alive today. They haven't changed at all, which means there really is no evidence of evolution in the rocks whatsoever. And I took a few other photos, by the way, John, which I'll send through, of some of the ones from around Alice Springs in the Red Centre, which is, of course, where we found some of the ones that we went collecting as well. This was pretty cool. I've added a couple of little bits to it, but again, this was a huge slab, again about 1.5 meters, so sort of 5-6 foot across, but it had this enormous fossil fish in the middle. And they actually had given it a name, angelfish. They said it was an ancient angelfish. And angelfish and parrotfish are in the same kind of grouping. They get fairly sizable today. They tend to eat a lot of the algae and stuff off of coral. And of course, the parrotfish with their great big thick jaws break off the coral and swallow it down and digest it. They're all in the same kind of grouping. But they describe this as an ancient parrotfish. Well, number one, there's your modern parrotfish, angelfish next to it, sort of in size. So number one, it's the same kind, so there's not really been any evolution, but you can tell that there has been some change. Namely, the change has been downhill change. It's been devolution. They've devolved from these enormous great big angelfish down to the modern day angelfish that are much, much, much smaller, and people have them in aquariums and stuff, right? But also, it's just look at some of the detail with all the scales and everything on it. Again, this is Jurassic, so no evidence of evolution. Great evidence of good to bad to worse, which is, of course, what the Bible describes, and also great evidence of rapid fossilization as well. Just one or two more quick ones. Of course, this is the famous fish. Well, it's often portrayed as a fish swallowing a fish, but if you look closely at a lot of the details, and we've spoken about this a lot, you can often tell that this is a fish that has been previously eaten before being squashed flat, because this is the Green River Formation. They're almost all flat, squashed flat fossils that have forced the fish out of its mouth. So again, evidence of rapid fossilization and deep and fast and fierce fossilization as well. Here's one I've not come across before, John. You've got your little knightia fossil fish on the left-hand side there, like the little herrings. And then on the right-hand side, you've got this rather amazing fossil bat. Just spectacular. Of course, you've got flying creatures and swimming creatures buried together. So we're definitely looking at something catastrophic here, although probably not on a global flood scale. That's right, isn't it, John?
So, Joe, that's Green River, not Solnhofen?
This is Green River here, yes.
Yes, we've recently written about a Green River fossil bat. You'll find that in our fact file.
Yeah, there we go. And so these are some great examples that you can see in the real world. Now, John, I'm going to let you talk about this because you requested specifically high-resolution photos of this when I showed you about them. So what are we dealing with here?
See the fossil on the left-hand side and the actual skull of a modern salamander on the right-hand side. We actually have a fossil as good as that from Texas, brought out here by Joe Taylor before he went to be with the Lord. What we don't have is the little cast there, or the replica of the skull that Joe's offering to pick up for us in the USA. Not all that expensive, but it will look like our display in the new Creation Discovery Centre here in Brisbane. And I'm really pleased to tell you, Joe, apart from the fossil bat, we have samples of every fossil you've showed so far in our Creation Museum. I'm a bit envious sometimes of the size of some of theirs, but then my luggage doesn't go to carrying a 2 meter long fossil angelfish back to Australia. But we have every one of those in the Creation Museum. And so we know from not just reading books, not just taking pictures in museums, but because we actually have the specimens that salamanders have turned into salamanders, and they used to be much more impressive in size.
Yeah, and it's just amazing to be able to get all this stuff and put it on display, as well as go and see some of these examples. So